Have you ever been accused of faking it? Have you ever caught somebody faking it? Well, we're going to talk about faking it today in the Safe House. So hang around. It's going to be a good conversation. We'll be right back. What's up, Safe House?
What's up, Safe House? We back.
We're not on the couches.
We're not on the couch.
We're in the studio in Safe House Studios.
It's just us.
It's just us today.
Yes.
We've had 3 lovely weeks of time with the pastors, and then we had ladies before that, just traveling this whole series on Is Marriage Still Worth It? We're going to be hanging out in this topic for a while because this topic branches off into so many different subject areas. And today we're going to talk about faking it.
Faking it.
Do you fake it? You been faking it on me? See, look at that face. She ain't saying nothing.
That's I have brought my true, authentic self to you, which is why I say all the time, I'm surprised you're still with me. Because I'm goofy, I'm all those things. So I'm always like, why is this guy still with me?
As a self-proclaimed nerd and useless tidbits trivia person, so I'm my authentic self as well. So I'm, so not faking it. We're trying to keep it. Go ahead.
But I did think you, like you said, have you ever been the victim of somebody, faking it, and I dated a guy who was like faking it. He told me that he was going to school, right? And and so we stopped spending a lot of time together because he was like, oh, I'm going to school, I'm going to night school or whatever. And so then, everything just wasn't adding up with me. And so what I did was I asked him what school he went to. Then he told me. So I called the school and asked them to send me like a the schedule of the classes and stuff. So
of course, none of the classes
Right. And so I actually was like, I said, oh, you must be enrolled in this class. And he was like, oh, yeah. So I had this man like enrolled in all kinds of stuff that he was never even enrolled in. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, like I said, after I realized that he was faking this whole thing about being in school, I didn't trust him anymore. Yeah. I didn't want to go out on a date with him because I was like, okay, you say you taking me to the movies. I might wind up in the forest preserve someplace. Right. So that was basically, that was a big red flag. That's for the singles. You got to pay attention to those kind of red flags. And I just broke up with him because at that point I was like, if you got to go through these lengths to say that you're going to school and you're doing it, just say you don't want to be with me anymore. So that was like my experience with finding out somebody was faking it with me.
We're all guilty of telling little white lies.
That was not a white lie. That was like a full, I had this guy I had invented lies myself and he was like agreeing with them. It was like a whole plot.
You were giving him enough rope to hang himself with?
Right. That's different. I'm like, you doing the most, I'm doing the most.
Right.
I'm just going to break up with you.
This is not going to end well.
Right? And it didn't.
Well, Safe House family, remember to like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel. Hey, and if you like the video, there's a new button down there called the hype button. So give us a hype. That tells the algorithm we're doing well, and it'll push it out to more people that you feel need to hear this message and listen to these conversations. So do that favor for us. We'd be very appreciative. Yes. It can help us out greatly in the process. So as we're traveling down this Is Marriage Still Worth It, is these 2 topics that kind of coalesce. So we're going to be talking about faking it today, and it's going to lead into this whole subject of settling.
Yes.
So faking it and settling, we believe these things are linked when it comes to the behaviors. Oh, yeah. You may even see in this episode, we'll bounce back and forth between each of the topics. But we're going to start out just kind of focusing in on what it means to fake it, to be fake. And then we're going to probably start to zero in on how that translates into settling. We believe it goes both ways. Faking could lead to settling. Settling can lead to faking, right?
And sometimes, I'm not going to say sometimes you don't know you're faking it because, like I said, it's all about deception.
Yeah.
At some point you decide to not to be completely honest about something.
Yeah. And deception is such a harsh word, but it's the truth, right? Yeah. It is because we decide We're going to not be either our authentic selves, not reveal something for one reason or another, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're trying to mask something that's embarrassing about ourselves. Other times we're trying to mask something that we believe that other person doesn't like or enjoy,
Yeah.
or may ruin our chances of developing a further relationship with them. Sometimes, we've got a former person that we used to be, and we're no longer that person. So we try to keep evidence of that person,
Right.
kind of hidden away,
Yeah.
right? And even though there's always consequences to what we do, um, one could say you're faking it when if you have this long past of being a certain type of person, and now you present yourself as being this type of person. Some people would construe that as faking. Some would say you're changed, right?
Right. That's true.
There are many ladies that was out there for the streets, right?
That's true.
And,
No, that is true.
And then they found the Lord, right? And they look like a completely different person. They're like, and we'll go up and be like, wait, I remember when you used to do all kind of things on the corner, right? And now, they got a Bible in their hands, right? And so some people would look at that and say that person was being fake when, really it's just an evidence of change. So it has many aspects to it.
I do agree with that.
Yeah.
And so I feel like when you're, kind of like my story, like I said, when you're dating,
right?
You always say that when we're dating, we're bringing...
We send our
representatives to the table.
Yeah, we send our representatives.
Our best version of ourselves, one that we may not be able to consistently keep up with,
right. Fellas, you know who that is. It's the girl that never passes gas, right? She only eats a salad, right? Knowing that, when she get home by herself, she's like a cow in a trough. But yet, I'm not saying that about you, right? But no, it's like, okay.
No, that is true.
If you like to eat.
Only, like I said, when you're ordering food, you're like, I'll just have the salad knowing you want it.
Yeah, I hear your stomach growling across the table. And you acting like you want to.
Because the other side of that is, it's like, man, because you don't want the guy to think, I want the steak and the lobster, and then you never invite me out again.
Right, yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, but then at some point, if you further the relationship, you are going to want some steak and some lobster and something else, right?
That is true.
And
that is true.
And you're sort of masking the fact that after the date, you going home and cooking yourself a whole meal or ordering a whole meal, get a DoorDash.
That's true.
After the date because you're still hungry.
That is true. That is true.
But we do. We send our representatives. We want to make a good impression. And some of it is, kind of the worldview, right? You dress up for the job you want. You kind of be the person that you want to be, right?
That's real.
And there's a fine line between that sort of aspirational person that wants to present themselves professionally and cleanly versus just out and out.
Can you do the whole fake it till you make it thing? I mean, I did. I mean, since you mentioned the whole job thing, I did that before.
Yeah.
Like with the job, they ask you questions and like, hey, do you know word perfect? That's me aging myself.
Yeah,
by the way.
Nobody out here that's in the workforce even knows what word perfect is.
But I said, yes, I know word perfect. And I didn't know word perfect. But I got the job. So guess what I had to do? I had to
learn word perfect
like
quick.
Very quickly and, kind of like fake it, be like, okay, like the little things that but I eventually got it, and sometimes I think that's how we are in relationships too, because we want to be that person.
Yeah. So I would only challenge that, so faking it to me is you don't know word perfect. You don't have the aptitude to even learn word perfect, right? You can't spell word nor perfect, right? And when you start on day one, you're going to be stumbling, fumbling, and bumbling, trying to figure out how to go through it. Versus if you know that you have the ability to acquire knowledge, synthesize knowledge, and go from novice to proficient pretty quickly, that's a skill and a gift, right? So I would say, just having confidence in that ability is not faking it. So if you're a software programmer and maybe you know Java, but you don't know React or Node or any of the other sort of newer development languages, right? And you go in and say, no, I've got experience with that. If you're a good software engineer, you have the ability to jump from one language to another because it's all syntax. You're solving problems, right? So to me, that's not necessarily faking it. That's me being confident in my ability to acquire and develop. Now,
Is that like wishful thinking?
it's not wishful because I've done that, and in fact, now being in the HR world, there's statistics that talk about there is the pay gap between men and women is real. Not necessarily, we're not going to go into the political reasons, but one of the reasons it exists is because many men are more confident going after jobs they're not on paper qualified for.
Mhm.
Right. So and they ask for raises that they may not necessarily be eligible for, whereas a lot of women will wait until they have the credentials, until they know they're capable before asking for it, because then they feel like they are qualified to do it. Whereas, I've had many roles that were well beyond my capability, pay grade, and experience, but I felt like I could do them.
Okay. So do you think that when people fake it, do you think they fake it at the beginning of the relationship, or like you said, as you start to get to know the person and then you start to find out things about this person because now you didn't caught feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're just like, okay, in order for me to kind of stay with this person, I'm going to have to fake some stuff.
I think faking it can happen at different degrees at different points in a relationship. Do I
Mhm.
believe in the beginning of the relationship, probably everybody's faking it a little bit?
Right.
Yeah. I think both sides of the coin. As the relationship moves along, then there starts to be a situation where one or both persons starts to develop an actual attraction and feelings.
Right.
They also become pretty sensitive to their own shortcomings, right?
Yeah. I agree with that.
And if you're a person that feels like your shortcomings will cause that other person to eject, right? You may be inclined to mask, hide, whatever those shortcomings may be, right?
Yeah.
You may also find things that are offensive about the person, right? But because you've developed feelings for them, you decide, I can deal with that,
Mhm.
right? And so you fake your way through something that you don't like, right?
Right.
For the sake of staying in that relationship.
Because you love them.
Because you like them, love them, or whatever
Yeah.
have you, or you have a guy that, I'll use a weird example, right? He may not have the best hygiene, right? But for some reason or other, he knows how to make a lot of money, right? He's the richest, funkiest guy you know. Okay.
I'm not making a comment.
So,
I'm sorry.
I mean, you gotta smell
mean-
you gotta smell onions, Doritos, and cabbage every time you come in your
we're
face.
not doing that.
Right? But he got that chop. He got that money.
I mean, I guess if that's my goal,
He's buying vehicles with cash. He's buying cars with cash.
Now,
right?
where I will agree with you is if that's like you said, I don't even know how I could mask that. I'm trying to think of how I could make that work. But I get it.
That's
I do.
that's an extreme example.
That's an extreme example.
But you have people that are dealing with parallel situations, right?
Yeah.
It may not necessarily be funk and money, right? But it's something just as offensive. And then on the other side, there's some upside that they see.
Right.
With this
So I was
person.
thinking more okay, I don't like animals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But I know you're a cat person.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm thankful that you're allergic to cats. I mean, because I don't know how that would have turned out for us.
Yeah.
Me having a cat.
Yeah.
Because I really don't like cats. So I was actually grateful when you said, "Oh, I love cats, but I'm allergic to them."
Yeah.
Yes, but like I said, I mean, I don't know if I would have tried
Yeah.
to get used to it, but I think I would have eventually said, I can't have a cat. They just, that's why we don't have any animals other than what can go in a cage. I mean, in a fishbowl.
Yeah.
Because I just don't like animals that get to walk around.
Yeah, you don't like animals that are real independent thinkers, right? You like animals that are nice and dumb and
that's not true. I don't want any animals.
Like I think you could stand a dog quicker than a cat, right? Because a dog is not very sneaky. Cats, let's put it this way. A dog treats you like you're its owner. A cat owns you, right? And so I'm sure you wouldn't appreciate a cat deciding to do what it wants to do.
I feel like this is the episode I keep talking about people I dated. Not that I dated a lot of people, okay? But I did date a guy who had a cat, okay? And I tried my best. I did, and the cat seemed to have loved me, and so I come over and the cat would jump in my lap and I'd be like,
Yeah.
You know, I'd start screaming and stuff. And so I was like,
Yeah, the cat adopted you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And that
Yeah.
just made me so uncomfortable
Yeah.
that I was like, yeah, I can't, this cannot be sustained.
Yeah, once that cat decides we can share spaces now, you don't have any private spaces
I was just
anymore.
like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So that obviously, God knew that relationship wasn't going to last.
Right. And so faking it in that situation, you'd have been absolutely miserable. Okay, because at some point,
miserable.
If marriage comes about, he's going to want a cat and probably multiple cats or whatever, and it's just like, okay,
I would have had to make a big decision.
Yeah. But you know, it's. I think people do it with the. You know, I'm not even going to say the right intentions. Let's just make it real. In some cases, we're very selfish. We want what we want.
True. That is true.
We want what we want. We see, you know, if it's a young lady, we see how she looks and how she carries herself. And she's like the ideal type of person, either mentally or physically or something like that. And she could have the most jacked up of attitude, but we want that image of who she is. Or you have a guy who holds a certain position or has a certain level of influence or has a certain drive about himself, has certain leadership characteristics, but, you know, he may be abusive, he may be controlling, he may be narcissistic, he may be all of these things, right? And that's how you see a lot of people end up in these relationships. It's just like, you know, I married a narcissist. Well, he was a narcissist when you met him, right? But you allowed all those other things. Big shout out to Pastor TK, including sex, right? You allowed that sex to cloud your judgment. I'll quote him. He says he was a bum to begin with, but you know you didn't got on the D, right?
That's what he said.
You know you on the pipe now, and so now you don't want to you don't want to see, you know, now you got to fake it, you know.
And I think what you said before is, like I said, I don't know if we said this on camera or not, but like you said, the underlining key to faking is deception.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's just the harsh reality of it. You know, whenever we feel like we, you know, either we're deceiving ourselves or we're deceiving the person that we're with. And I like what you said. We've all done it to some degree. You know, we're, like you said, you know, I know you didn't want to call it wishful thinking, but like you said, that's me deceiving myself that this can work. Yeah. You know, or that's me not showing up in my authentic self. You know, like if you said, hey, you know what, I can't date somebody who's not in church. Yeah. You know, I can't date somebody who smokes, or I can't date somebody who drinks or whatever. Now, I'm all of those. I'm like, I don't go to church. I drink and I smoke. Right. You know, now I'm not going to be able to give up all of them at the same time. But every time me and you together, we at church, you don't see me drinking and I ain't smoking. But it doesn't mean that I've stopped any of those things.
I've just changed that behavior.
I've just changed the behavior because I think too that's another form of faking it. Yeah. It's like what we do is we change the behavior when I'm in front of you, but when I'm not in front of you, now my behavior is here. But at some point, goes back to what you said, when we're together, like I said, if now we get married, I'm not going to be able to sustain that. Yeah. Because I'm going to want to drink. I'm going to want to do something else. I'm not going to want to go to church with you every Sunday. Right. Or whatever. All of that is because my authentic self is showing up.
I'm going to want to drink and smoke on Sunday, right?
That's right. And I don't do any of those things. I'm just using it as an example because it could be anything.
Right. It could be anything, right? You know, and it's there's this rabbit hole goes deep.
It does.
Right?
It really does.
Because where do you think we learned this faking skill? Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of places where we picked up faking as okay. Yeah. Right. So once again, I'm going to hang myself out there a little bit. Right. So you know, when we were younger, my mom was part of a particular religion. Right. That doesn't celebrate holidays, right? And so that was what happened at the place where we worshiped. You know, we don't celebrate holidays, birthdays, things like that. However, around holiday time, there was always some cooking and some getting together and some card playing.
On those particular days.
You know, on those or somewhere around those days. Right. Usually not inviting any of the folks that we worship with, right? but a whole other set of people, that were okay, and so you kind of get taught, oh, okay, I behave this way for church and I behave this way in life, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like we're kind of trained.
That's good. Yeah.
We're cool with it. Right. It's just like, oh, we don't celebrate Christmas. Hey, there may not have been a tree, but there may have been some gifts given. Right. It's like.
But I like the word that you used. We were trained because that's all I know.
Yeah.
Like I said, now it's in me. Like you said, it seems to be okay behavior.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we say about the white lie.
Yeah.
Like, no lying, but you be like, you can say a little one. You hear your parents be like, you ain't even telling the truth about that. But, they call those little white lies. I don't know what a white lie is versus just a regular lie.
Right.
But once again, it's that. It's like, what do you, if I'm trained to do that, then how do I untrain myself?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So it's like, your mom and dad would say, don't you ever lie to me, right?
Right.
When the bill collector called, what they say, tell him I'm not here.
You want me to lie? Yes.
Yes.
Or like, right, exactly. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, we can have a whole bunch of stories on that, but that would get us like totally off kilter on where we're going.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I think we need to travel here because this is real talk, y'all.
Right.
Some of y'all been trained to lie and deceive and fake, and you don't even realize you're doing it.
No, that's true.
You know what I mean?
That's true. That's what I was going to say. Sometimes, like you said, you're like, no, I'm not faking it. This is who I am. And you're like, it's okay to do that.
Yeah, my mama
stuff.
did this. My daddy did this. My grandparents did this. We come from a long line of fakers, right?
And nobody ever said we were fakers. This is just how we lived our lives.
But then how does that bleed over into everything else?
Yeah.
And when do we actually be authentic, right? When do we start to shed those behaviors? When do we start to realize that maybe some of those behaviors are actually toxic and they're hurting us and we don't realize it, right? It's one of these wake up moments, when we really have to stop and say, wait a minute, man, I've been taught to deceive here. I've kind of learned that deception is okay here. Now, here's the other third rail we'll step on. We see it happens a lot. I'm not going to say the church. The church is the bride of Christ, but in the organization, the groups that gather together that are part of the body, there's some faking training going on there, right? So being a marriage mentoring team ourselves, we witness firsthand couples that come to church and act like they're together and they worship together, they're singing songs together, and when they say hug your neighbor, they're hugging each other. And then when service is over, they walk out the door and get in separate cars and go to their separate places. Or they go to the same home and go to different floors or different bedrooms because there's a breach in that relationship, right? But they've been taught to sort of maintain this look, while they're in front of people like us, or
kind of like the fake flowers, on the table. They look beautiful.
They look beautiful, but they don't. They don't have any smell. They don't have any whatever. You can't plant them and grow other plants. No, they're only there for presentation.
And I think that's so important. Like you said, just that whole part about it not being real. Because that's not what we want to nurture in relationships. And I think that's how we make the switch to, like you said, faking it versus settling. Because a lot of us have just settled for the fake flowers.
We've settled for the fake flowers, and we've settled, and therefore we've presented a fake relationship. Now I'm going to save this, I'm not going to save it. I'm going to say this right here, but we're going to explore it further. When we start to settle in relationships, so say, for instance, we settle for a person, and now we fake that this person is all that we want them to be, right? Because no one wants to be with somebody that doesn't want to be with them, right? But we settle for this person, so now we got to fake like we really want to be in a relationship. We've done several selfish things now, right? So one, we've taken away the opportunity for that other person to find somebody that is in love with exactly who they are. Right. So because we've settled, right? Two, we're now making this other person believe that we want everything that they are, and we really don't. We really don't.
That's very sobering.
And so at some point, we're not going to be able to maintain the charade. Right. What we really don't like or really don't enjoy or really wanted more of, we basically told this person for our own selfish purposes, because that person meets a need for us right now in the moment.
Yeah.
This is the best of options that I have right now. I'm going to use you to meet this need, knowing that you're not the choice that I would have made otherwise, right? And so it's a really cruel thing.
Yeah.
When we choose to do that and we settle for somebody thinking, and sometimes we make it all about us. Well, I got to settle. I'm not worthy. I'm this, that, the other, so on, so on, so on. So no. You're robbing someone else when you do that, because you want to be with somebody in a relationship, cared for, whatever, right? You want a need met. So it's, it can be a very toxic thing.
And sometimes too, like you said, how do we get there? It's like you said, it's all about personality too. Because if I have the personality of a people pleaser, or I don't want to disappoint someone, then now I'm like, well, I'll just overlook that, or that's okay. I don't have to do this, even though I love it. I can forego this part of who I am. Like if you see on my shirt, it says, I choose me. Yeah. And so there's nothing wrong with choosing you. Yeah. I like myself, because if I don't like myself, if I'm not presenting that part of who I am to you, then what's going to happen is, like you said, and we'll be talking about this later, is you start to see the symptoms of settling. Yeah. You start to see the resentment. You start to see the bitterness. You start to see the cracks in the real relationship versus the fake relationship that you formed.
Yeah. And it's some of that can be the result of a self-esteem issue, a brokenness issue, an abuse issue, right?
Absolutely.
Because basically what you've decided is that my needs, my desires, they're never as important as someone else's, right? So therefore, I must take my needs and desires and put them on the back burner in order to meet other people's needs, because mine aren't just that important. They're not as valued, right? All of those things, I've convinced myself of that, right? And it may look selfish, but at some point you have to recognize, no, your needs, your desires, the things that you desire are valued and they're valid, right? That doesn't mean, and we're going to make a difference between compromising and settling. Yeah. Because compromising is about investment.
Right, because you have to do that when you're married. Right.
But settling basically says, I'm going to take a less than optimal situation because there's no other options available to me. I'm just going to take this. Yeah. If I had a choice, I would do something else.
If I had a choice, I would do something else. But like you said, but if I feel like I don't have a choice, then this is how I'm going to show up. And it's also, like I said, if it's about knowing how to communicate those traumas and those past hurts, because sometimes we get caught up in the whole fake thing because we don't know how to communicate to the person that we're with that, what, I'm still a work in progress. Yeah. I still engage in certain behaviors,
right?
But I don't want to hide that from you. Right. Because the reason why I'm hiding it from you is because you've already said that you don't want to be with somebody like me. Yeah. Yeah. And that's me right now. Yeah. I want us to be together, but I don't know how to effectively communicate to you that that's me right now. Right. And I'm working through becoming something different. Right. Everybody doesn't want to date my becoming.
Right. And in some cases, some people don't want to become. They're like,
that
look,
is true. Yeah.
They're like, look, I like taking a drink, right? And I know you don't like that. I act like I don't drink when I'm around you, but I'm going to take a drink, right? Yeah. And so you have these people that think that way, and so they create a presentation like we've been trained to do in front of you. We send a representative, that doesn't drink, and then when we get a chance, when we're somewhere else, we do it. But once again, we've now suppressed who we really are. We've created deception because now I have to not only be deceptive in doing my behavior, I have to do further deception in order to create space to do the behavior that I enjoy.
It's like it's a spiral. Like you said, it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, it is a rabbit hole. Yeah. So
I'm looking forward to really kind of like delve in a little bit deeper into like you said, the whole settling thing. Because like I said, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, because we've talked to several people who feel like the negative part of settling, because I do feel like there's a positive side of settling.
Yeah.
Like we're settling in, I feel like me and you, we're settling into this newness of, our kids being adults.
Adults, yeah.
And
everybody's
so,
grown, right?
Yeah, so now we have to settle into this whole new lifestyle of, okay, now what do we do just by ourselves? Because now it really is about, me and you. And some people have a hard time settling into that lifestyle, because they like, well, now I've decided that I don't even like you anymore.
Yeah.
It's like a whole thing.
Well, the word settler isn't a bad word, right?
That's true.
The whole idea
of
settler is, you go and you establish land that you own, that you develop, that you turn into something, right? The early settlers took open land.
They did.
And they turned it into little villages, hamlets, cities, right? That eventually became communities, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a positive side to the word settling, but you very rarely hear that.
And we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah. It's I look forward to talking about the settling component, the faking component, and what say you out there? I mean, are you evaluating, where have you settled in your life? Have you settled for things? Have you been on the other side? Do you feel like you were settled for?
That's a good one. Yeah.
Do you feel like you were settled? And I'd have to imagine that realizing that you've been settled for can be a little disappointing.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
That wow, this person had better options and I was just the only thing available, right? That's not fair. Now, here's the positive. If you are a believer, if you are of the Christian faith like we are, right, there is a hope. Because the good part about all of this is that once you start to recognize where you are today, the difference between us and the world is that we have a hope that allows us to take us from one place to another place, right? So whereas right now what may look like settling, right? This is only a situation that I'm in, right? To this now becomes a blessing, right?
Yes,
this is now something that goes forward. I mean, Joseph had to settle for being thrown in a hole, right? And being in prison. And he had to settle for a situation, whatever he was in. But then that very situation turned out to be the situation that he could bless his entire family, right?
I like what you're saying. Like you said, he had to settle into that because he wasn't in jail for a day. I mean, he had to really kind of settle into that. But even as he settled into that role, God was still developing him. Into that's just really powerful.
And he still did what he was gifted to do. He still dreamed dreams. He still interpreted dreams, and they heard word about him. And he was able to do these things. And even when he was settling into this place, it's like, okay, I'm sure he didn't grow up wanting to be a keeper of an Egyptian's house.
Right.
Right,
absolutely.
But he grew into that role, but still maintaining his belief. And that belief then turned into a hope that saved his entire family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so there is a positive hope if you're willing to embrace it. It does require some self-examination, sometimes even a little bit of repentance, but we'll begin to go down that path as we talk about those things. So if you all like what we're talking about here, remember to like the video, share it, subscribe. The new thing, hit that hype button, right? So don't just give us a thumbs up in terms of the like. Give us a thumbs up and then hit that hype button. And it'll let small creators like us get more into the public visibility. We want to thank you for all the support you have given. Some of these videos, the pastors, the ladies, you all just blew those things up in terms of the shorts views and the video views. And, no, we're not Mr. Beast by any stretch of the imagination in terms of views. But the community that we serve, we thank you for all the love you've been showing us and the communication and the reach out. So,
what song is going through my head, right?
What?
Alexander.
Which one is that? Oh, you're a fan?
I
wasn't on a positive note, and you going back to...
I know. I can't help it. Once again,
You've been bopping to that whole song the whole episode, right?
I'm sorry. See, that's what I'm saying.
She's not fake. At least she's authentic, right? This is who she is. On camera and off. This is exactly who she is.
We love you guys, and I'm so glad that you guys love me the way that I am.
That's Safehouse. We're going to end it. And
as we usually
do. Peace.